Glad to have you here with us. Welcome to all of you who are with us online. Mike and Linda are back from their travels, so I've got my ace supporter up in the media room taking care of me this morning. Welcome back, Linda. If you were here last week, you know we spent a little bit of time on a science class, and with your patient endurance, I want to spend just a tiny little bit of time on that this morning, revisiting a little bit the idea of irreducible complexity. And this will not be an ongoing habit, so don't get too distressed or uncomfortable. But I came across one other little item that just really piqued my interest and kind of blew me away. How many of you are familiar with the Flagellum Cell? Have you ever heard of a Flagellum Cell? You're familiar with it? You would be. I wasn't. It's just amazing. It's a very tiny cell. It occurs in much of animal life and even in some plant life, I find out. It's a kind of at the bacteria level of size. It's a structure resembling a whip that sticks out from a cell and by which some tiny organisms, as bacteria, move. It's the way they, locomotion. It's the way they move from one place to the next. This is the way it's described in Wikipedia. The bacterial flagellum is driven by a rotary engine made up of protein located at the flagellum's anchor point on the inner cell membrane. The engine is powered by protein motive force, that is, by the flow of proteins, hydrogen ions, across the bacterial cell membrane due to a concentration gradient set up by the cell's metabolism. You got it? Any questions?
You want to explain that a little bit?
Yes, I do want to explain that a little bit, Al. Thank you for giving me that opening. Here's one of the flagellum, however you say it, cells that you will be familiar with. This is the sperm cell. It's not the only one, not the only kind of cell that has this motivation inherent in it, but this is one that we're more familiar with because, of course, this is the one where we have the joining of the male sperm with the female egg to recreate us. And it looks like what you saw a while ago with the bacteria. It's got the little tail that gives it its motion. The tail wobbles and gives it its motion. And I didn't know this. I just assumed that when the sperm encountered the female egg, it just penetrated it like an arrow would and entered it, but it doesn't actually. Once it comes in contact with the wall of the female egg, it automatically produces a chemical which bores a hole in the wall and allows the little cell access to the egg. Isn't that neat? I didn't know that. You also probably know that women are born with all of the eggs they'll ever have in their life. Men, on the other hand, produce these little sperm cells throughout their entire life. It may dwindle somewhat in the older age, but they'll never stop producing these. Millions and millions and millions of them. Here's where it gets interesting. This is what that little sucker looks like. And the best way I can describe it is it's an outboard motor. It's got all the elements. It's got the rings, it's got the lubricant, it's got the engine, And that little blue thing there is the engine, and that thing spins. And it spins at a rate of about 1,000 RPM. Just a little side story. When I was in high school, they came out, DeSoto. You remember the DeSoto cars? DeSoto had this great idea. Some engineer dreamed up this great idea that they would create a transmission control. Instead of a lever, it would be a push button. And of all things, they put it right in the middle of the steering wheel. You ever see that? You've seen that, haven't you, Jess? That DeSoto came out, and you got the steering wheel, and you got the circle in the middle, and there's your transmission buttons right there in the middle. Well, one of the guys I went to school with, I wouldn't say he's my friend. We didn't move in the same circles. But his dad bought one of those. And he's brand new, and he's in the middle of Stigler on the main street, which is also the only street. And he's cruising down Main Street, and he's got that thing just idling along at about 1,000 RPM. And for some unbeknownst reason, he decided it would be fun to find out what would happen if he reached over and pushed the R button. Now, maybe he thought R meant race. I'm not sure. But most people know that R means reverse. And somehow or another, that wasn't engineered to keep it from happening, so it went into reverse. And he left transmission all up and down Main Street in Stigler. Well, this little thing goes 1,000 RPM, and it reverses itself instantaneously without tearing itself up. And it happens over and over and over again. Isn't that fascinating? And you got millions of those guys. And actually, the human is kind of unique because this is the only flagellum cell in the human body. Now, there are a lot of other kinds. Some of them have more than one of these motors, but only the men have it, and this is the only one in the human body. But the real miracle of it, of course, is that it just accidentally, unplanned, undesigned, happened. Isn't that marvelous? What a miracle is that? Irreducible complexity. The atheist has a steep hill to climb. All right, we've been talking a little bit about seeking to put on the mind of Christ and seeking the heart of Jesus. And I had a passage that came to mind in my devotional this week, and I wanted to bring it in and relate it to this idea. You know, we are, as animals, we are endued by our Creator with a fight or flight mechanism, right? If something happens in your life that creates a threat, our instantaneous response is to either fight or run. We can't help it. We can't control it. Our heart rate immediately increases. Our adrenaline pumps up. Blood pressure goes up. The hairs on the back of your head may stand up if you have any on the back of your head. We can't help it. That's just what we do. I think pretty much all upper animal forms anyway. I don't know how down in the food chain it goes, but upper animal forms have the same inherent, innate response to threat. However, for humans, after that instantaneous response over which we have little or no control, we are presented with the God-given, God-imitating, image-bearing right to choose. And we've talked about this several times before, but how many of you read the book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Dr. Covey? Most of you, I hope. If you haven't, you need to. It's a marvelous book. And he begins with a discussion of this very fundamental God-given gift that we have between the response, not that fight or flight, but once that's over, between the response, between the stimulus and the response is this gap where we choose. And we get to choose our response to that, how we will handle that situation. And the Bible speaks about this. It has quite a bit to say about that period that exists. First of all, in Deuteronomy 31:6, and this is Moses at near the end of his life as he's giving the charge to the entire tribe of Israel, said, "Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid and do not panic, for the Lord your God will personally go ahead of you. He will neither fail you nor abandon you." Strong and courageous, and I kind of like this, I think this is the NLT, the New Living Translation. Do not panic. That's after the fight or flight, when our heart rate has dropped down a little bit, and we have the opportunity to choose how we will respond. And as Christians, we have God on our side, and He will not fail us, and He will not abandon us. Now, God Himself gave this same instruction to Joshua in Joshua 1:9. After the death of Moses, the Lord's servant, the Lord spoke to Joshua, son of Nun, Moses' assistant. And He said, "This is my command, be strong and courageous." And then He adds, "Do not be afraid or discouraged." Now, different translations have different words for discouraged, but I like that one especially. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. That takes a little bit more effort on our part, doesn't it? And we all face situations in our work and in our families and in our relationships with one another where we get pretty discouraged. It's easy to look at the 6 o'clock news, or if you're on cable, to look at the 24-hour news and really get discouraged, is it not? It's discouraging out there, folks. And God says to Joshua, and Moses says to Israel, and I believe Jesus says to us, you're not part of that. You are above that because I am with you, and you can choose stimulus, response, choice. You can choose not to be discouraged. So the next time you get down on yourself or down on the world or down on politics or down on whatever it is, just remember God has given you the opportunity, and dare I say, command, to not let that be a discouragement to you. Remember whose you are. All right.
Be strong and courageous and do not be afraid. The Lord goes with you each and every day.
You're welcome to sing along.
Courageous and do not be afraid. Don't be afraid. Every day. He'll never forsake you. And courageous and do not be afraid. Don't be afraid. Every day. The Lord goes before you through the trouble and strife, and He will protect you all the days of your life. He'll never forsake you. And courageous and do not be afraid. Don't be afraid.
So when that happens, all you have to do is just remember the song, right? And wonder where your program went. I'm sure Linda will fix it. So last week I gave you a homework assignment, and I told you there'd be a test, so we're going to come to that now, and I'm going to review just a little bit to bring everybody up to speed on where we are. This is the account of Jesus at the age of 12 when Joseph and Mary took him and the family to Jerusalem on the Passover day and lost track of him while he was in the temple. The text says, after the celebration was over, they started home to Nazareth, but Jesus stayed behind in Jerusalem. His parents didn't miss him at first because they assumed he was with friends or relatives among the other travelers. But when he didn't show up that evening, they started to look for him among his relatives and friends. When they couldn't find him, they went back to Jerusalem to search for him there. After 3 days, they finally discovered him. He was in the temple, sitting among the religious leaders, among the religious teachers, discussing deep questions with them. And all who heard him were amazed at his understanding and his answers. His parents didn't know what to think. Son, his mother said to him, "Why have you done this to this? Your father and I have been frantic, sick with worry, searching for you everywhere." "But why did you need to search?" he asked. "You should have known that I would be in my father's house about my father's business." But they didn't understand what he meant. Then he returned to Nazareth with them and was obedient to them, and his mother stored all these things in her heart. So in our emphasis on searching for the heart of Jesus, thinking about this first real glimpse that we have of Jesus as not an adult, but a near adult, in his actions and his words and his response, what can we say from that we learn about the heart of Jesus? Who wants to start? I don't want to give everybody an F.
Well, the one thing that I want to say is when they found him, he was about his Father's work. His heart was directed and focused on doing what his Father would want him to do.
Absolutely. What else? Come on over, Jeff. I can't get to you. You got something, David, while we're waiting? Anybody else?
Mike said a wonderful thing, so I'm going to say...
He beat you to it.
Well,
he does that to me all the time.
Well, anyway, he did a wonderful thing, and it came out of his heart.
Yes.
And your heart is right here.
Right.
Exactly.
You got it. Thank you, Jeff.
And that's all I'm going to say.
Triggered another thought.
I've got one more. We often struggle with the concept of being disobedient, possibly as we're being disobedient. There's almost a paradox there where he was so focused on that while all of us as parents want our kids to do what we tell them to do, and one of them is be with us when we're ready to go or whatever, and he was not. He had other things to do, and so you can look at that as disobedience possibly, but the goal that he had, the focus that he had, sort of overrides that. When your heart is pure for God, possibly there may be something there that we don't understand and that overrides what may be thought of as disobedience.
Okay, thank you. Hang on. Let me come around. We don't want to leave our people online out of the discussion.
We're looking at everything through Jesus' eyes, but you've also got Mary and Joseph. And they didn't jump in the car and drive back. You know, their getting around was probably much, much harder than ours. So, and it says that when Jesus responded to him that they did not understand. I wonder if he got yelled at. I mean, truly, you know, you find your kid and he's okay, so,
It sounded like, hand it back to Jeff, sounded like a little yelling to me. I'm not sure.
This is a possibility. I'm thinking Jesus is talking to these scholars, and he's asking them questions for them to doubt themselves. And he's hinting that he's going to change things.
She has that.
Do you know specifically when the boys received training? You know, did they, in the Talmud or whatever, when did they start their training? At what age? Because I'm wondering how much he was really into the
Thank you for that introduction.
scriptures.
I'm going to go over all of that. Thank you very much. Yes. Good, a good segue there. Thank you. Because it's quite interesting, actually.
I didn't know if anybody else was going to get to this, but basically, one of the things that makes me think of is when Jesus went and cleansed the temple from the money changers. John's commentary on that was that that's a fulfillment of zeal for thy house shall consume me. And I think that in this particular incident we've been talking about, that's exactly what it was too.
Yes. Prelude, yes, absolutely. Okay, here are a few things that some of you have already mentioned some of these, and then we'll move on. I think, as Mike said, he understood and embraced his relationship with God from a very early age. By the time he was 12, he knew who he was, and he had an unfolding of what he was about. He valued and possessed a strong knowledge of sacred scripture, would you say? He was holding his own with the top rabbis of the Jewish religion at that time. I think we can draw from this that people liked and respected him. I don't think the rabbis would have spent that amount of time with a little snotty-nosed 12-year-old kid if he hadn't been quite likable, quite personable, and certainly worthy of respect because of his knowledge and his attitude. And then, of course, and the end result was, as Scripture says, he was obedient to his parents. I don't think that he intended rebellion when he stayed behind. I think he was just consumed with his father's house. And when that time came, he was obedient to his parents. We talked about that last week. All right. So, the Dark Ages. The Dark Ages for Jesus are that period of time from age 12 to about age 30. We don't have scripture on this. But when has that ever stopped us? So let's talk a little bit about Jesus from age 12 to his immersion at age 30. This would be roughly from 4 BC to about 26 AD, 27, maybe 30, I don't know, somewhere in there. He has at least 4 brothers, and we're told this by 2 of the writers, Mark 6 and Matthew 13. Their names are James, and we know from our study of James that that's not correct. It's actually Jacob. But King James liked his name, so it got switched over into English as James. One was Joseph, which was another form of Joseph. One was Judas, a form of Jude. One was Simon, a form of Simeon. And he also had sisters. We don't know how many. We're not told, and we don't know their names. But those are the things that we do know about Jesus and his growing up. No further mention after the temple incident at age 12. There's no further mention of Joseph, his father. Many assume that he probably died fairly young. We don't know. I mean, we just know that by the time we get to the miracle of Cana, Joseph's not included in that, nor is he included in any other discussion of Jesus past the age of 12. If that's true, then Jesus, being the oldest son, would have taken on the responsibility of the family. I wonder how that played out with the other four brothers. Was there some sibling rivalry going on with that, do you think? How would it have been to be the brother of Jesus and try to come up to his standard, or justify not coming up to his standard? He no doubt provided for the family by working as a builder, as he was taught by Joseph. We know that he was named by Mark as people having said about him, "Isn't this the carpenter?" In one place it says, "Isn't this the carpenter?" In another place it says, "Isn't this the carpenter's son?" He was schooled in the art of construction. There are some really wild stories out there about Jesus' growing up period, like there are about anything to do with his life, but some of them are just way far out. And I don't know of any credible theologians or biblical scholars who give any credence to them, but some of the accounts that are proposed in some literature is that he went to Britain and studied with the Druids. There's a pretty common one that talks about him going to India and studying with the Buddhist priests. There's a story that he went to Tibet and Persia and Assyria and Greece and Egypt. There's even a story that he visited Japan and returned there after he survived the crucifixion. It was a swoon, and after he woke up from the swoon, he went to Japan. Some say he went to the Judean wilderness and studied with the Essenes, the radical group of Israelites. There's even one account that he came to America. I don't know who thought that one up. Anyway, we're not going to give any credibility to any of these. We're going to stick with what we know from the Bible. So, coming to your question, concerning Jesus' education. We know this from secular history, that this is the way that education was handled in the time that Jesus was growing up. Somewhere around the age of 5, he would have gone to the synagogue school there in Nazareth, and he would have been taught to read and to write. The reading and writing would have been in the Hebrew language, the Hebrew alphabet, and Aramaic, which is the language that they spoke at that time. The common language was Aramaic, and there's no doubt in my mind or in the mind of most scholars that his native tongue was Aramaic. In their synagogue teaching, it would have all been based on Torah, the first 5 books of the Hebrew Scripture. I'm not sure exactly why they would begin with Leviticus, but that's where they chose to begin. And they would, for the most part, memorize a large amount of Torah. If they didn't memorize it, they would have it paraphrased at the very least, depending on their skill level. Girls would also have some training. They would be taught from and memorize the Psalms. They didn't need to learn the law because the men were going to interpret and imply the law for them. It wasn't their job. Somewhere around age 10 or 12, they would begin to fully embrace a tutorship into the family trade, whatever that was. And in Jesus' case, of course, that was the carpentry, the building. If they were an exceptional student, then they would continue with the rabbi and they would learn or memorize the rest of the Old Testament. This was just normal for them to memorize things. And it stood well for them because there were times when Scripture was pretty well lost, and people having memorized it, they were able to recreate that. In their later teen years, if they were the best of the best of the best, intellectually and in their desire, truly exceptional, then they would be entered into a Bet Midrash school, a house of study, and they would begin to learn the Talmud. And the Talmud, as you remember, is the oral translation, the oral tradition. The Talmud is what the Pharisees, especially, but the scribes and the Pharisees and the rabbis used to enhance, explain, flesh out the law of Moses. And this is where Jesus and the religious leaders got into so much conflict, because they were continually accusing him of violating the oral traditions. But anyway, they would learn that in this Bet Midrash, if they were the best of the best. And these would become the rabbis. By age 20, they would assume full vocational responsibility, if not before. And by age 30, then they would begin to assume full spiritual responsibility. And this is generally when rabbis would take on the full mantle of their occupation, somewhere around the age of 30. And that's what Jesus was when he began his ministry work. Talking about his vocation a little bit, in Hebrew scripture, the word carpenter appears 11 times, usually in connection with masons or stone cutters. The Hebrew word literally means a carver. So building projects of wood or of stone would equally apply. But the idea that we might think when we say carpenter of somebody who works with wood, while it might be marginally true, it would not have been substantially true because there wasn't that much wood in Palestine, or I shouldn't say Palestine, in Israel. And stone was everywhere. And they built everything. All the houses were built of stone. So when you think about Jesus occupationally, he's a stonemason more than anything else. And that is not for sissies. You have to have some strength, some stamina to work with stone. When Jesus uses his teaching, he would be very familiar with rejected stones. He would be very familiar with cornerstones, and these are metaphors that he used a lot. He also, of course, was not very far from Sea of Galilee, and he would have been familiar with fishing. Maybe he did fishing. Maybe he met some of the fishermen there they would later call. Certainly he would have been very familiar with the occupation of shepherding, because that whole area was covered with shepherds and with sheep. So those would have been all familiar things that he would draw on. Nazareth was a very small community. And to make a living in Nazareth as a stonemason or a builder or a carpenter would have been rather difficult. About 3.5 miles from Nazareth was a place called Sepphoris. And here's some aerial views of it. There's the reconstructed, excavated synagogue there. It's built on the Roman road. It was a major thoroughfare. The Roman road, of course, went all through the Roman Empire, and that's what allowed Paul and the apostles to travel freely and safely throughout the region as they spread the gospel. Well, Sepphoris was one of those places there. After Herod's death in 4 BC, a rebel named Judas, son of the local bandit Ezekias, attacked Sepphoris, then the administrative center of the Galilee, and sacked his treasure and his weapons. Some people said that they burned it down, but the archaeologists haven't confirmed that. Herod's son, Herod Antipas, was made tetrarch, or governor, and he rebuilt it as the ornament of Galilee, and that's based on the writings of Josephus. So here, just a short distance from Nazareth, is this Roman settlement, this Roman community that is in the process of being rebuilt as Jesus is growing up. And so there is going to be an abundant opportunity, unlimited opportunity due to the small size of the Nazareth and all the work that's going on in Sepphoris for Jesus and for Joseph and for the other brothers of Jesus to have had all kinds of employment opportunity. If that is what happened, and it just seemed very reasonable to me that it did, it makes all kind of sense, that since that was a capital of the Roman city, Jesus would certainly have become very familiar with Greco-Roman culture and also with the Greek language. To refer to Israel today as Palestine is not politically correct if you are with Jewish people. Jewish people resent that being called Palestine. Following the Jewish revolt in 66 to 78 to 74 AD, a second revolt occurred in 132 to 135 AD. You may remember this from your history. The Roman Emperor Hadrian banned circumcision, built a memorial to Pompey, and threatened to build a temple to Jupiter on the temple site. After killing 500,000 Jews, he banned all of the Jews from Jerusalem, built a Roman colony there, changed the name of the country to Palestine after the name Philistine to spite the Jews. It remained Palestine officially until 1948, when England gave Israel back to the Jews, and it became the state of Israel. But the term Palestine to a Jew is a term of derision. It was intended that from the very beginning. And we use it today because we hear it on the news all the time. But just be aware that it is an offensive and incorrect term. Our time is up. We're going to, we met John the Baptist briefly at his baptism, and now we're going to come back to John next week as he encounters Jesus on the Jordan River. Thanks for your presence, your participation, all of you who are with us online, and have a wonderful God bless week.